The trees passing by the car window resembled a person racing through life. Tanabe and Kokichi's destination had once been a public facility, so it could be reached by car. However, given that the curse user's curse technique involved controlling automobiles, it might not be wise to drive too close. For that reason, Mekamaru decided that he would disembark partway there and walk the rest of the not inconsiderable distance to the site. Tanabe looked apologetic and had trouble accepting the decision, but Mekamaru told him not to worry about it. This was no time for enjoying the scenery, but the colorful mountain caught Kokichi's attention. Under the trees whose leaves blocked the rain, a bird that looked like it was wearing a little necktie hopped over a carpet of fallen leaves. That was a Japanese tit, Tanabe had said as they passed, and Kokichi had turned the name over in his head. Now Mekamaru walked along a route he had studied beforehand. A faint wind was blowing and it was raining. Birds took shelter in the trees and insects crawled under the fallen leaves. Kokichi hadn't set a foot outside his room, so all he could do was gaze out through Mekamaru's eyes. But that was how he interacted with the world. If his body healed, would he be able to experience nature in its countless life forms with his own senses? Come to think of it, that gorilla-like Panda had said that he would come visit Kokichi. Panda himself didn't have the kind of physical form that could just go gallivanting around out in the open, so Kokichi wondered how he intended to visit. Panda looked so much like a panda that he didn't even wear clothes the way that Mekamaru did. Kokichi tried to picture Panda wearing a hoodie, jeans, and a hat to board the bullet train. If he did it boldly, he just might get away with it. Kokichi surprised himself by smiling, but he knew this daydream would never come to pass. He didn't know what to call the feeling arising within him, so he pondered it for a moment. That was careless. As he reached a crossroads, he suddenly heard an engine. A red sedan with a bent license plate was glaring at him. It took off toward him, racing down the slope of the road, a metal box accelerating under the force of gravity. Its trajectory was simple, but its area and mass made it a threat. Mekamaru had no choice but to take drastic evasive action. He was in the mountains, so he could dive into the trees to avoid a collision. Still on course for Mekamaru, the sedan slammed into a tree and stopped. Mekamaru watched as the crash caused birds to burst from the branches. "What a welcome," Mekamaru said. He stayed off the road as he continued through the trees towards his destination. Since the enemy was deploying a considerable attack, he would be safer with obstacles around. However, the closer he drew to the curse user's base, the fewer obstacles there would be. As he walked, a change came over the branches of the trees around him. The leaves were dead and black instead of green tinged with red. Previously, everything had taken on a white cast in the drizzle, but now it seemed murky because of the gas. Eventually, the trees thinned out, the view opened up, and he entered an open area. The scene before him looked like an automobile graveyard. Some vehicles retained their original form, while others were nothing but piles of junk. Deep in his gas-obscured field of vision, beyond a mound of scrap metal, Mekamaru saw a building that looked like a factory. Would a curse user hide in a factory? He wondered. Abandoned cars surrounded the area, which, given the curse user's technique, put Mekamaru at a disadvantage. The curse user was likely to notice any intruder who stood there gawking, and Mekamaru wouldn't be surprised if the enemy used that moment to escape. But to catch a lion cub, you had to enter the lion's den. So Mekamaru remained on high alert and advanced into the junkyard. His metal humanoid form traversed this labyrinth of abandoned cars, a forest of rusted, decrepit steel. It was like a graveyard full of black gas, showing no signs of life. Aside from his own heavy footfalls, it was eerily silent. Kokichi was considering the significance of this quiet when a small form darted in between abandoned cars. It was a remote control car, he realized. It was making a faint noise as it raced along. A Shikigami was riding in it, sitting next to a box-shaped device that the curse user had apparently strapped into where the seats were. Kokichi had known that the enemy's curse technique involved manipulating automobiles, so he had expected that the curse user would use the mass of full-size cars to crush him to death. This curse user, however, appeared to be able to employ a variety of modern technologies. Mekamaru pointed his arm toward the remote control car. "What a small target," he exclaimed. His left palm opened, revealing the device that fired the ultra cannon. Suppressing the output, Mekamaru immediately found his aim and fired. The blast struck, and the remote control car went up in flames. The next moment, there was a bright flash and an explosion much larger than what could have been generated by a mere battery-powered toy. "I suspected as much. Explosives," Mekamaru remarked. Mekamaru planted both feet on the ground to withstand the blast. Just then, he spotted 3 3 remote control cars racing toward him, using the roofs of abandoned cars as ramps to launch themselves across the junkyard. Mekamaru had been careful to restrict the Ultra Cannon's output, but he still barely had time to reload. In the nick of time, he brought up his hand and fired again. Even at reduced output, Ultra Cannon wasn't supposed to fire consecutive shots, but Mekamaru mowed down the remote control cars anyway, swinging his arm without bothering to brace against the recoil. "It seems the curse user has prepared considerable defenses," he commented. Kokichi was beginning to sense the gravity of the situation. He couldn't possibly defend against exploding remote control cars with close-range armaments like Sword Option and Ultra Shield. Thus, he had no choice but to shoot. As he rapidly alternated between cooling and firing, though, the burden on his arm was mounting. Furthermore, a remote control car exploded near him, and the blast limited the space in which he could maneuver. Mekamaru had saved armament for use later, but that put him at a disadvantage against an enemy this relentless with their attacks. In the case of a cursed technique that used Shikigami as the substrate for controlling machines, however, the number of Shikigami was limited to the number of cars the curse user could control at any particular moment. That meant that there had to be a break in the attacks. When that break came, Mekamaru could follow the route by which the Shikigami returned to the curse user and pinpoint their master's location. However, Kokichi decided that focusing on withstanding the enemy's attacks was the wisest for the time being. Just then, from beyond the flames of the explosion from the remote control cars, a giant shadow fell across the mountain of abandoned cars. A tanker truck was hurtling towards Mekamaru. "So that's how it is, huh?" he exclaimed. The essence of the enemy's curse technique was that the curse user could manipulate any kind of automobile, and that leeway allowed for a broad range of attacks. The explosions had maneuvered Mekamaru into a position where he would have little room to evade the falling tanker. Even if he did so, he might lose an arm or a leg. Mekamaru needed to take out the curse user who was deploying the Shikigami. He was almost overheating, but since he didn't have many long-range attacks, he couldn't afford to lose Ultra Cannon. Preserving his left arm was necessary for victory. Having made this decision, Mekamaru evaded in a way that could result in losing his right arm instead. However, he hesitated. In the next instant, there was an explosion, several times more powerful than the explosions from the remote control cars. The blast burned Mekamaru's uniform and sent him flying. He ended up rolling on the ground. He had used his all-important left arm to shield himself from the powerful blast and ended up sacrificing it in the process. Without even realizing it, he had protected his right arm. "Ah," he muttered. The burnt sleeve now exposed Mekamaru's right wrist, causing him to realize why he had moved in such an irrational way. The keychain on the scrunchie attached to his right arm rattled as it dangled there. "It appears you have realized your mistake," a voice said. "Must be the curse user," Mekamaru speculated. The voice was coming from the stereo of a nearby abandoned car. Though indistinct, it suggests someone younger than Mekamaru had imagined. The curse user didn't sound worried. They knew that Mekamaru had messed up. Kokichi bit his scabbed lips. He really had messed up. He had succumbed to an emotional attachment that had no place in battle, and that was careless. The common affairs of everyday life were like a curse that had limited his power. Nonetheless, the curse user pointing out his error caused him to seethe with anger. "I'm surprised they sent a cursed corpse, but I guess it makes sense," the curse user said. "Your remote control, like my curse technique. You misunderstood my curse technique, though. The only thing I can use are small insect-like Shikigami. Within my field of vision, if I have the Shikigami possess an object, like a car, I can control almost all of that car's functions and do whatever I want with its mounted cameras and navigation systems." "You planned on divulging your curse technique. That's why you left the car navigation systems operational," Mekamaru guessed. "Impressive," the curse user replied. "It's gratifying to have someone with a bit of theory to appreciate my methods." Kokichi ground his teeth. The curse user had gotten the better of him. It was only natural that he would boast about it. The problem was that the curse user had chosen this particular moment to reveal his curse technique. He had even provided a clue to his location with the words, "within my field of vision." That suggested the curse user meant to finish off Mekamaru right here and now instead of running away. Although Kokichi supposed he might also render Mekamaru immobile and then flee at his leisure. At any rate, he was certain that Mekamaru was his only opponent. Kokichi thought it through. The curse user was probably located somewhere that afforded an overhead view of the entire junkyard. Kokichi should be able to determine where that was. Mekamaru raised his gaze past the top floor of the abandoned factory to the roof. He spotted a figure wearing a gas mask and an air tank. The man, who looked more like a mad scientist than a curse user, was looking down at him. "Ah, our eyes meet," the man said. "You've got me in your sights." "Yet you don't sound worried," Mekamaru replied. "Because I'm not," You've located me, but you don't show any intention of attacking. No more long-distance moves, perhaps? Aren't you perceptive? Yes. Perception is what drivers need most. Look right, look left, look right again, and be sure to look over your shoulder. One must obey the rules of the road, sorcerer. Well, my real body is immobile. I can only use remote-controlled bodies, so I don't get out much. Mekamaru had no way of attacking during this conversation. He had lost Ultra Cannon when he lost his left arm, and without it, even with the visual lock on the enemy, he couldn't execute a long-range attack. As the enemy prepared for the crushing blow, Mekamaru felt helpless. No, I can do something, he thought. He could go all or nothing with Mode Albatross. That was the artillery in his mouth for Ultimate Cannon. However, Ultimate Cannon ordinarily required the support of both arms, and his body was damaged. The most he would be able to manage before overheating was one shot. Nonetheless, his chances of taking out the curse user weren't low. Judging by the air tank the curse user wore, he was a Shikigami user, and typical of the type, meaning he himself wasn't much good in a fight. Thus, the chances of Mekamaru striking his target were high. If he could manage a long-range attack, he could probably finish the fight, but it would result in this body's destruction. There was no reason to hold back when using disposable equipment. Kokichi knew that was his smartest option. Despite that, however, Mekamaru swung his right arm and extended the blade called Sword Option. Deploying a close-range weapon in this situation was like an admission of the futility of the situation. What can you do with a blade from over there? The curse user asked.
I can strike you down,
Mekamaru replied. Impossible. Are you so foolish that you don't know why I've pushed you to exactly that spot?
No. I do know, but I want to make this hard for you.
Mekamaru glanced around the area. The small Shikigami, which looked like mosquitoes, disappeared into the mountain of scrap cars. Once I've killed you, you'll be just another piece of scrap, the curse user declared. Mekamaru lunged with Sword Option. At the same moment, flames erupted throughout the mountain of automobiles. The curse user must have used Shikigami to blow up a large amount of explosive material somewhere inside it. Scrap rained down, blocking escape in any lateral direction, but that didn't prevent movement in every direction, for Mekamaru's blade was homing in on a specific object. The curse user shouted when he realized Mekamaru's target. When the tanker had fallen, one of its enormous tires had come off. The blast from such a large tire when it ruptures can be greater than that of a grenade. Kokichi Muda himself was missing part of his right arm and both legs. That he had tried to protect Mekamaru's right arm, which wasn't really his, had been foolish. But there was something he could do with that arm now, precisely because it was mechanical and equipped with a blade. Mekamaru swung at the tire. The force of it bursting, aided by the blasts from other explosions, carried Mekamaru high into the air.
Boost on! Maximum output!
He shouted. The booster from his right elbow activated, giving him even more altitude. His right arm, however, began to fail due to damage from the tire exploding and stress on the boosters that had been propelling him.
Come on,
Mekamaru muttered. When he reached a point higher than the factory, he used his mouth to rip the keychain from his right arm. Even that action further eroded his arm. At the zenith of his arc, he experienced a moment of weightlessness, then twisted his body and swung the near-demolished arm downward. The curse user realized what Mekamaru was aiming for and began to flee, but it was too late. At the Goodwill event, Mekamaru had carelessly turned his back on Panda, and this scene now played in Kokichi's head. His certainty in finishing the fight with a big move had caused him to permit an opening. Choosing this particular tactic might have been irrational. Perhaps it was too sentimental for someone who had joined hands with cursed spirits to want to bring this body home from a fight. He wanted that more than ever, however, when he looked at the cheap keychain. These irrational feelings fueled Kokichi's cursed energy.
You should have kept your Shikigami nearby for defense,
Mekamaru said. If obsession gave rise to curses, then sorcerers could change curses into strength. Mekamaru fired his boosters at the same time he swung, packing his right arm with maximum force. A scene from the anime Kokichi used to watch flashed back in his mind. It was a powerful signature move. Everyone who admired robots knew about it. A steel fist launching and flying through the air.
Rocket punch.
Like a dark gray shooting star, it parted the cloud of gas. Launched at high speed, his fist assumed the momentum of a cannonball. Mekamaru often used firearms and projectiles, so his aim with this long-range attack was sure to be accurate. If the curse user had been more agile, he could have dodged. But he was a Shikigami user and a respirator. He made a desperate attempt to loose his Shikigami, but he was too late. Mekamaru's fists were faster than wind. The Shikigami user's scream, muffled by the gas mask, sounded from the stereos of several abandoned cars. When Mekamaru's fist struck, the explosion swallowed those screams. The Shikigami frantically flitted around, losing control and plummeting to the ground. Kokichi, realizing the curse user had fallen unconscious, managed to land then, despite missing both arms. Oof, he sighed. Kokichi wondered why he had been so desperate to preserve an expendable body. What powered his steel puppet was his own desire to return home and see his friends again. The curtain lifted, and a drizzle washed away the cloud of gas. It was all over, and Mekamaru was still standing. All right, y'all. That was actually section 6 of chapter 2. I lied to you last section, and I'm so sorry. And now that I'm done apologizing, let's go ahead and talk about this section. I am so proud of Mekamaru. The character development since the Goodwill event is unprecedented. You remember when Panda accidentally called Mekamaru a cursed corpse, right? You remember the fit that Mekamaru threw over being called a cursed corpse? Well, this curse user calls him a cursed corpse, and he doesn't react that way. And of all the things in this chapter that show how much of a bond that fight between Panda and Mekamaru created, this moment right here floored me. I know that's small. I know it's oddly small, especially considering the rest of the stuff in the chapter. But Mekamaru's learning rate is insane. Another thing I thought was a little bit interesting is this curse user. He does what? Controls automobiles? I feel like we've had some car crashes in this story, haven't we? How'd Rico's parents die? Was it a car crash? I think it was a car crash. Yeah, it was definitely a car crash. We got that beautifully animated recently. A seaweed-covered car at the bottom of an aquarium. That was beautiful. Thank you, Mappa. You're wonderful. Also want to give a shout out to the curse user for the reason that I feel like Gege wrote this line, or Ballad Kitugami wrote this line specifically for me to express how my soul feels when it comes to JJK. But the curse user says, it's gratifying to have someone with a bit of theory to appreciate my methods. Man, when I tell you I felt that. Anyway, there are 2 thoughts that I want to leave you with at the end of this section. One of which is the sound of Mekamaru's footsteps walking through the eerie silence of an abandoned junkyard. I need that animated so bad. And the second one is, as beautiful and heartbreaking as the scrunchy situation is, what breaks my heart most about Mekamaru's chapter was when I realized that he has never, ever felt the rain on his skin. Section 7 is the last section of the chapter. So, look forward to it, and I will see you all there.